My parents threw my belongings onto the lawn after Sterling blamed me for destroying his marriage. My father shouted, "Get out!" and my mother refused to hear a word. 1 month later, an anonymous email exposed the affair, the stolen money, and the message where Sterling admitted he had framed me. It was a Tuesday night. I remember that clearly because I had just finished a massive design project for a freelance client, and my eyes were burning from staring at my monitor for 14 hours straight. I lived at home to save money while building my portfolio. I parked my used sedan in the driveway, right behind my older brother Sterling's gleaming black Porsche. Sterling did not live with us. He lived in a massive house in the suburbs with his wife, Claire. Seeing his car there at 11 at night sent a cold spike of anxiety right through my chest. Something was wrong. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the hallway. The house was dead silent, but all the lights in the living room were blazing. I walked around the corner, shrugging off my jacket, and froze. My father, Harlan, was standing by the fireplace. His face flushed a dangerous, dark red. The vein on the side of his neck was bulging against his collar. My mother, Marianne, sat stiffly on the edge of the leather sofa, clutching a tissue in both hands. And there, sitting in the armchair with his face buried in his palms, was Sterling. He was shaking. He was actually sobbing. "What happened?" I asked, dropping my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. The clink sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. My father snapped his head toward me. He did not ask how my day was. He did not ask if I was okay. He marched straight up to me, his chest heaving, and pointed a trembling finger right at my face. "Get out!" he screamed. The sheer volume of his voice rattled the picture frames on the wall behind me. "Get your things and get out of this house right now. Why would you do that to your brother?" I took a step back, my mind completely blank. "Do what? Dad, what are you talking about? Do not lie to us, Everett," my father roared. He stepped closer, forcing me to back up against the wall. "Sterling told us everything. He told us exactly what you did with his marriage. He told us about the girl you introduced him to, the lies you covered up, the way you helped destroy his family." I looked past my raging father and stared at Sterling, my older brother, the golden child, the successful corporate manager who could do no wrong. Sterling slowly lowered his hands. His eyes were red, but there were no tears on his cheeks. He looked at me with this hollow, pathetic expression. "Sterling, what did you tell them?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I haven't even seen you in a month." Sterling sniffled and looked at our mother. "Mom, please. I can't look at him right now. My whole life is falling apart. Claire is filing for divorce, and he is the reason." My mother finally stood up. I looked at her, desperately hoping for a shred of reason. I wanted her to ask me for my side of the story. I wanted her to be the mother I thought she was. Instead, she stared at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. It was a look you give a cockroach on the kitchen floor. "I have nothing to say to you, Everett," she said, her voice ice cold. "You are completely rotten. Your brother is losing his wife. He might have to fight for custody of the dog. And his entire life is in ruins because of your sick jealousy." "Mom, this is not true. Please just listen to me," I begged, holding my hands out. "I don't even know what he is talking about. Who did I introduce him to? What girl?" "Stop talking," my father bellowed. Before I could even brace myself, my father grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and shoved me toward the front door. "I am not listening to your poison anymore. You are out of this family. Get out." He threw the front door open. The cold night air hit my face. Before I could process the physical shock, my father turned around and stormed down the hall toward my bedroom. I heard the sound of drawers being ripped open. I heard plastic bins crashing against the hardwood floor. "Dad, stop. My work stuff is in there," I yelled, running after him. My mother stepped into the hallway, physically blocking my path. She pushed her hands against my chest. "Do not go in there. You do not live here anymore." A minute later, my father emerged carrying a massive load of my clothes, my chargers, and my expensive work laptop. Without hesitating, He walked out the front door and threw everything onto the damp grass of the front lawn. My shirts scattered across the dirt. I heard the sickening crack of plastic as my laptop hit the edge of the concrete walkway. "No!" I screamed, dropping to my knees on the wet grass. I frantically grabbed my laptop, praying the hard drive was intact. This machine was my entire livelihood. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely zip it into my backpack. My father stood on the porch, glaring down at me. "Do not ever come back here. If you step foot on this property again, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." He slammed the door shut. The deadbolt clicked. I knelt there on the dark lawn, surrounded by my scattered belongings. The sprinklers from the neighbor's yard were ticking in the distance. I looked up at the living room window. Through the blinds, I saw Sterling standing there. He wasn't crying anymore. He was just watching me. I shoved my clothes into garbage bags I found in my trunk. I threw my ruined electronics into the back seat. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and I drove away. I drove aimlessly down the empty streets of our suburban neighborhood, the streetlights flashing over the dashboard, wondering how 28 years of family history could be erased in less than 10 minutes. I truly believed that being discarded like actual garbage by my own parents was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. I was wrong, because what I did not know that night was that Sterling had not just panicked. He had executed a deliberate, calculated hit on my life. And 1 month later, an email would arrive that would blow his entire sick charade wide open. I spent that first night parked in a brightly lit gas station parking lot, terrified to close my eyes. By morning, my phone battery was at 4%. I called the only person I knew would pick up, my best friend, Reed. Reed lived in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment near the highway. When I showed up at his door carrying 2 black garbage bags and a backpack, I did not have to say a word. He took one look at my bloodshot eyes and my wrinkled clothes, grabbed the bags out of my hands, and pointed to his worn-out brown sofa. "Sit down," Reed said. He handed me a glass of cold water. "Tell me what happened." When I explained everything, Reed just sat there, shaking his head. He knew my family. He knew Sterling was the golden child, the son who got the expensive college fund while I had to take out student loans. He knew my parents worshipped the ground Sterling walked on because he was an executive and drove a Porsche. But even Reed was shocked by the sheer cruelty of it. "They didn't even ask you one question?" Reed asked, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "Not one," I said, staring at my shaking hands. "They just tossed me out, like I was nothing." I slept on Reed's couch for 4 days. The apartment smelled faintly of stale pizza and cheap laundry detergent, but it was safe. Every morning, I woke up with this crushing weight on my chest, hoping it was all a nightmare. I would immediately check my phone, expecting a text from my mom saying she was sorry, or a missed call from my dad asking me to come back and explain. Nothing. The silence from them was deafening. On the 5th day, I tried to call my mother. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried my father. Straight to voicemail. They had blocked my number. I sat on the edge of Reed's couch, the phone heavy in my hand, feeling a hot wave of humiliation wash over me. I was their son, and they had erased me with the push of a button. I could not accept it. I needed to see them. I borrowed Reed's car because mine was running on fumes, and I drove back to the house I grew up in. My heart was pounding frantically against my ribs as I walked up the driveway. The Porsche was gone. I rang the doorbell. I waited. A minute later, the door swung open, and my mother stood there. "Mom," I started, my voice desperate. "Please just give me 5 minutes. You have to listen to me." Her face hardened into stone. She did not look at me like a mother looking at her child. She looked at me like a stranger trying to scam her. "I told your father you would try to slither back," she said coldly. "If you do not leave this porch right now, I am dialing 911. You are not welcome here, Everett. Your Aunt Sarah has already told the rest of the family what you did to your brother. Do not embarrass yourself further." She slammed the door in my face. The sheer finality of that wooden door hitting the frame broke something inside me. Aunt Diane, of course. the biggest gossip in the family. Sterling had not just poisoned my parents. He was systematically destroying my reputation with every relative we had. I walked back to the car, my vision blurring with angry tears. But the betrayal was not over. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Fletcher. Fletcher and I had been close friends since high school, and he was also a buddy of Sterling's. I opened the message, expecting support. Instead, the words on the screen made my stomach drop. "Don't ever contact me again, man. Matt told me everything. I can't believe you would set him up with some random girl and help her hide from his wife. You ruined his marriage. You're sick. We are done." I typed out a furious reply. "Fletcher, you know me? I didn't do anything. He is lying. Message not delivered." Fletcher had blocked me too. Sterling was burning my bridges one by one, watching the flames from a safe distance. He had completely isolated me. I had no family, no extended relatives, and now my oldest friends were turning their backs on me. I was a social pariah, cast out for a crime I didn't even understand. But I was done crying. Sitting in Reed's dark apartment that night, eating cold noodles from a takeout box, a deep, bitter realization settled over me. I was not going to win them back by begging. I was not going to get my family to love me by showing them how much they hurt me. They did not care. I needed to know the exact details of the lie Sterling told. I needed to know who this mystery woman was. And I needed to survive. The next morning, I moved out of Reed's place. I found the cheapest, most rundown studio apartment in North Austin. The landlord, Mr. Norcross, was a grumpy man who demanded 2 months of rent in cash up front. I handed over almost my entire savings, leaving me with exactly $42 to my name. The studio was tiny. The floorboards creaked, the pipes groaned, and the single window looked out over a dumpster. But the door had a deadbolt. I locked it, sat on the bare mattress on the floor, and opened my cracked laptop. I had to fix this. I had to find out the truth. And I had to start making money before I starved. I spent the next 3 weeks operating like a machine. I woke up at 6 in the morning, drank cheap instant coffee, and glued myself to my cracked laptop. I sent out hundreds of applications for freelance design work. My survival depended entirely on my ability to keep my head down and ignore the gaping hole where my family used to be. Mr. Norcross, the landlord, knocked on my door on the exact day rent was due, tapping his thick gold ring against the cheap wood. He did not care about my sob story. He wanted his cash. The pressure of the ticking clock forced me to work harder than I ever had in my life. I barely slept. I ate generic canned soup. I wore the same 3 shirts. Eventually, the relentless grinding paid off. I landed a massive contract with a marketing firm run by a man named Mr. Ashford. Mr. Ashford was a no-nonsense CEO who valued fast, high-quality work over corporate politics. I delivered a branding package 3 days ahead of schedule. He called me personally, his voice booming through the phone speaker. "Everett, this is excellent work. My team loves it," Mr. Ashford said. "I know you're freelancing right now, but I want to offer you a full-time remote position. Good salary, full benefits. You earned it." When I heard the word salary, I actually had to grip the edge of my cheap desk to keep from falling out of my chair. It was a lifeline. It was stability. For the first time in a month, I felt a genuine spark of hope. I accepted the job immediately. I was finally standing on my own 2 feet. But the ghost of my brother's lie still haunted me. I could not move on until I knew the truth. Through a mutual acquaintance who hadn't completely cut me off, I finally managed to find out the name of the woman Sterling had blamed for his divorce. Her name was Vanessa. She was a physical therapist who worked at a clinic near Sterling's corporate office. I tracked down her social media and sent her a direct message. I explained who I was and asked if she would just meet me for coffee. To my surprise, she agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. Vanessa was a sharp, professional woman in her early 30s. She sat across from me with a defensive posture, holding her iced latte tightly. "I only agreed to meet you because I want this insane rumor to stop," Vanessa said flatly. "Your brother is out of his mind. I have never had an affair with him." He told my parents that I introduced you to, and that I helped cover up the relationship, I explained, watching her reaction closely. Vanessa let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Introduced us? Everett, I have never met you in my life until today. And as for Sterling, he was a patient at my clinic for a shoulder injury 6 months ago. That is the extent of our relationship. I am happily engaged. She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. She showed me pictures of her fiancé, a tall guy with a beard. Then, she pulled up her work schedule and a few emails. She proved to me, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that during the weekend Sterling claimed they were sneaking away together. She had been out of state at a medical conference. She had an ironclad alibi. He is using my name because I was convenient, Vanessa said, taking her phone back. I was a female professional in his orbit. He probably thought I wouldn't fight back. But I will sue him for defamation if he keeps this up. I thanked her and walked out of the coffee shop with my mind racing. The cold air hit my face, but I barely felt it. If Vanessa was completely innocent, that meant Sterling had not just made a panicked mistake. He had not just gotten caught in a misunderstanding and thrown out the first name he could think of. He had deliberately fabricated an entire fake affair. He picked a random woman from his clinic, and he picked his own little brother to be the scapegoat. Why? Why go through all the trouble to invent a fake mistress and blame me for it? The answer hit me like a physical punch to the gut. He was hiding the real mistress. He needed a distraction, a loud, chaotic explosion in the family so nobody would look closely at what he was actually doing. And I was the perfect target. I was the disposable younger brother. He knew our parents loved him more. He knew they would take his word as gospel without asking for proof. I drove back to my studio apartment with a cold, hard anger settling into my bones. The sadness was gone. The desire to be loved by my parents had evaporated. Now I just wanted justice. I wanted to tear down the fake pedestal Sterling stood on. But I had no proof. It was just my word against his, and my word was worthless to my family. That night, I celebrated my new job by ordering a decent pizza instead of eating soup. I sat by the window, watching the rain hit the glass, feeling a strange sense of calm. I had a salary. I had a safe place to sleep. I was surviving. At exactly 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I almost ignored it, thinking it was a spam email. But the screen lit up the dark room, and my eyes caught the subject line of the notification. Subject, you were never the problem. I sat up instantly. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. I grabbed the phone and opened my inbox. The sender's name was just an alphanumeric string, a burner email address. The message inside was terrifyingly brief. Everett, you did nothing wrong. I should have told you sooner. Open the attachment before Sterling tries to rewrite this story again. My thumb hovered over the screen. The file was attached, a massive PDF document. For a second, a wave of pure terror washed over me. What if it was a virus? What if it was Sterling trying to mess with me again? But the wording, someone knew exactly what had happened. I tapped the screen. The file downloaded. And what I saw on the very first page made my blood run cold. The document opened, and the bright white light of the screen illuminated my dark apartment. I stopped breathing. The very first page was a screenshot of an email, officially stamped by a family law attorney. It was a formal declaration for a divorce proceeding. I scrolled down frantically. Page 2 was a massive compilation of text messages. The background of the text showed they were pulled from Sterling's phone, and the person he was texting was not Vanessa. The contact name was saved as Bianca. I started reading, and my stomach violently lurched. The messages were explicit, reckless, and sickeningly affectionate. They talked about booking hotel rooms downtown. They talked about how annoying Claire was. But what made me physically nauseous was a specific exchange dated 2 days before my parents threw me out. Bianca, Claire is getting suspicious. What happens if she finds out? I'm not dealing with your crazy family. Sterling, don't worry about it. I already have a plan. If things blow up, I'll tell my parents it was a misunderstanding with that physical therapist, Vanessa, and I'll say Everett set us up. They hate Everett's lifestyle anyway. They'll buy it instantly. Bianca, you'd throw your brother under the bus? Sterling, he's a loser. It doesn't matter. They'll focus on being mad at him and I'll play the victim. Just lay low. I read that paragraph 5 times. He called me a loser. He mapped out my execution like he was planning a grocery run. He knew our parents favored him, and he weaponized their blind loyalty to protect his disgusting affair. I kept scrolling, my vision turning red with absolute fury. But the betrayal went even deeper. The next few pages were financial records, bank statements, credit card bills. There were thousands of dollars charged to luxury jewelry stores and high-end restaurants, all for Bianca. But the most damning document was a bill of sale. Sterling had secretly sold his black Porsche. I stared at the paperwork in disbelief. The car I had seen in the driveway that night, the car he constantly bragged about, had been sold 3 days after I was kicked out. He sold it for cash to a private dealership to cover the massive debts he racked up from his affair. But right below the bill of sale were screenshots of text messages Sterling had sent to our father just last week. Sterling, Dad, Claire's lawyer is destroying me in the divorce. They froze my accounts. I don't even have money for rent. I might lose everything because of what Everett did to my marriage. Harlan, Dad, do not worry, son. Your mother and I are pulling from our retirement savings today. We are also going to redirect the money from the college fund we set up for your kids. We will wire you $40,000 tomorrow. We won't let Everett's evil actions ruin you. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. A cold, surgical rage washed over me. Sterling was not just using me to hide his mistress. He was using my exile to actively scam our parents out of their life savings. He sold his luxury car to pay off his mistress's debts, then cried poor to our father, blaming me to steal their money. And my parents, in their infinite stupidity and bias, handed him their retirement cash without asking a single question. I reached the bottom of the PDF. There was a final note typed at the bottom of the last page. I found his backup phone in the guest room. I saw everything. I am so sorry I stayed quiet. Everett, I was just trying to protect myself and get my ducks in a row with my lawyer. He took everything from you. It's time to take it back. Let's meet. Below the note was an address for a diner on the outskirts of town and a time. 9 a.m. tomorrow. The sender wasn't a stranger. It was Claire, Sterling's wife. I did not sleep a single second that night. I sat at my cheap desk, staring at the wall, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The sadness was entirely gone. The boy who cried on the front lawn was dead. The man sitting in that chair was dangerous. The next morning, I put on my best button-down shirt. I drove to the diner. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. Claire was sitting in a booth in the back, nursing a black coffee. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes, but her posture was rigid and determined. I slid into the booth across from her. I didn't say hello. I just looked at her. You brought the physical copies? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. Claire reached into her large tote bag and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. She slid it across the sticky Formica table. Everything is in there, Claire said quietly. The texts with Bianca, the car sale, the wire transfers from your parents. My lawyer said I have enough to absolutely destroy him in the divorce. I'm taking the house. I'm keeping our dog. He is getting nothing. Why give this to me? I asked, tapping the folder. Because destroying him in court isn't enough, Claire replied, her eyes flashing with a cold fire. He destroyed your relationship with your family to cover his tracks. He's sitting in your parents' house right now, eating their food, spending their retirement money, and playing the victim. He needs to lose them, too. I looked at the folder. The weapon I needed was right here. It was heavy, undeniable truth. Are my parents home right now? I asked. Claire checked her watch. Yes, it's Sunday morning. They are all there, having a nice, peaceful family breakfast. I grabbed the folder and stood up. Let's go ruin their breakfast. Claire and I drove in separate cars. I pulled up to the curb of my childhood home. The grass where my laptop had shattered a month ago was perfectly manicured. The house looked quiet, pristine, and entirely built on lies. I walked up the driveway with Claire right beside me. She rang the doorbell while I stood a step behind her. A moment later, my mother opened the door. The instant she saw Claire, her expression shifted from surprise to concern. Claire told her, "We need to show you what Sterling has done." My mother hesitated, then stepped aside. Claire entered first, and I followed her into the foyer. We stepped into the foyer. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen. I heard laughter. It was my mother, chuckling at something Sterling said. The sound made my blood boil. I walked straight into the dining room. My father was reading the newspaper at the head of the table. My mother was pouring orange juice. Sterling was sitting there in his expensive cashmere sweater, cutting into a pancake. The moment they saw me, the laughter died instantly. The room went dead silent. My mother dropped the juice pitcher onto the table with a loud thud. My father stood up so fast his chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. "How dare you come into this house?" my father roared, his face turning that familiar, dangerous shade of red. "I told you I would call the police. Get out before I have you arrested." "Call them," I said, my voice dangerously steady. I did not flinch. I did not back away. I walked right up to the dining table and slammed the thick manila folder down right next to Sterling's plate. Sterling looked at the folder. Then he looked at Claire standing behind me. The color completely drained from his face. He suddenly looked like a ghost. "What is this?" my mother demanded, pointing a shaking finger at Claire. "Claire, what are you doing here with him? He ruined your marriage." "No, Marianne," Claire said, her voice dripping with venom. "Your golden boy ruined his own marriage. Everett had absolutely nothing to do with it." My father stared at Claire, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Sterling told us about the physical therapist." I opened the folder. I pulled out the first stack of papers and spread them across the polished dining table. "There is no physical therapist, Dad," I said coldly. "Her name is Bianca. Read the texts." My father hesitated, then picked up the pages. My mother leaned in to look. I watched their eyes dart back and forth across the printed text messages. I watched them read the explicit details of their favorite son's affair. I watched them read the exact message where Sterling called me a loser and planned to use me as a scapegoat. This is fake," Sterling stammered, his voice cracking. He tried to stand up, but his knees hit the table. "Dad, it's fake. Everett fabricated this to get back at me." "Shut up," my father snapped. It was the first time in my entire life I had ever heard my father speak to Sterling with that tone. I did not stop. I pulled out the next stack of papers. The financial records. "Now let's talk about the money, Dad," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "You wired him $40,000 from your retirement and the kids' college fund, right? Because his accounts were frozen." My father looked up, his face pale. "How do you know about that?" I slammed the bill of sale onto the table. "Because his accounts aren't frozen. He sold his Porsche 3 days after you kicked me out. He got $60,000 in cash for it to pay off the debt he racked up buying jewelry for his mistress. Then he came here, cried his fake tears, and stole your retirement money." My mother gasped, pressing her hand over her mouth. She looked at Sterling, her eyes wide with horror. "Sterling, is this true? You sold the car? You took our money?" Sterling was cornered. He looked frantically at the doors, at the windows like a trapped rat. "Mom, listen. Bianca was just a mistake. And the money, I needed it, I was stressed." "You framed your own brother," my father bellowed. The rage that had been directed at me a month ago was now aimed directly at the golden child. My father stepped toward Sterling, grabbing the collar of his cashmere sweater. "You lied to our faces. You stole our money. You let me throw Everett out onto the street." "Dad, please, I'm sorry," Sterling cried, actually sobbing this time. Real tears. But it was too late. My father dragged Sterling out of his chair. "Get your stuff." My father spat, his voice trembling with sheer fury. Get your bags. Get out of my house. My mother did not try to stop him. She stood there, completely paralyzed by the realization of what she had done. 10 minutes later, I stood on the front porch with Claire. We watched as my father physically threw Sterling's expensive suitcases out the front door. They tumbled down the steps and landed on the exact same patch of grass where my broken laptop had landed. Sterling stood on the lawn, crying, humiliated, holding a single bag. He looked up at my parents standing in the doorway. Then he looked at me. "Everett, please say something," Sterling begged, his voice pathetic and weak. "Tell them to stop. We're brothers." I looked at him standing in the dirt. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, just closure. "Now you know how it feels," I said. I turned my back, walked to my car, and drove away. The satisfying crash of Sterling's life hitting rock bottom was loud. But people like my brother do not just walk away quietly when their fake world collapses. They claw at whoever is closest. And 2 days later, he tried to claw at me. It was a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my desk in my studio apartment, finalizing a design project for Mr. Ashford. I had just received an email confirming that my first real salary paycheck had been deposited into my account. I was finally breathing easy. Then, a heavy, frantic pounding started at my door. I looked through the peephole. It was Sterling. He looked like a complete wreck. His hair was greasy. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, and he had dark, bruised-looking bags under his eyes. I opened the door, leaving the chain lock attached. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. "Everett, let me in," Sterling pleaded, pushing his face near the crack in the door. "Dad cut off my credit cards. Claire kicked me out of the house. Bianca won't answer my calls now that the money is gone. I have nowhere to go. Let me crash here." I stared at him. The sheer audacity of this man was breathtaking. He had manipulated our parents into throwing me away like trash, and now that his lies had blown up in his face, he expected me to save him. "You are not coming in here," I said calmly. "Go stay at a hotel." "I don't have any money," Sterling yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "Mom and Dad won't even answer the phone. You have to help me. Everett, I'm your brother. You owe me." "I owe you nothing," I replied. "You made your choices. Now live with them." I went to shut the door. Suddenly, Sterling's demeanor flipped. The pathetic begging vanished, replaced by a vicious, unhinged anger. He shoved his foot into the doorframe, preventing me from closing it. "You did this to me," he screamed, his face twisting with rage. "You and Claire. You ruined my life. If you hadn't brought those papers to the house, none of this would be happening. You're going to pay for this, you little punk." He started slamming his shoulder against the door, trying to break the chain. The cheap wood of the doorframe splintered. I didn't argue. I didn't yell back. I simply pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and put it on speaker so he could hear the operator answer. "Yes, I need police assistance at my apartment immediately," I said clearly. "There is an aggressive man trying to break down my door." Sterling's eyes went wide. He pulled his foot out of the doorframe and backed away down the hallway. "You're crazy. You're calling the cops on your own blood?" he yelled, before turning and sprinting toward the stairwell. I shut the door and slid the deadbolt into place. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of finally setting a hard, impenetrable boundary. 15 minutes later, Officer Conrad arrived. He was a tall, calm veteran officer. I let him inside, showed him the splintered doorframe, and handed him my phone. I let him listen to the 3 voicemails Sterling had left me while running away, voicemails filled with unhinged screaming and threats. "I want a restraining order," I told Officer Conrad, looking him dead in the eye. Officer Conrad nodded and photographed the splintered frame. He saved the threatening voicemails with the report. "Given the property damage and the recorded threats, this should support an emergency protective order request," he said. "A judge can order him to stay away from you, your home, and your workplace. If he violates that order, he can be arrested." Filing that police report was the final nail in the coffin of my past life. With the photographs, the damaged doorframe, and the recorded threats, I filed for an emergency protective order. Within 48 hours, a judge approved it and the paperwork was served to Sterling. He was officially barred from my existence. But the fallout wasn't just limited to Sterling. A week later, I received a long text message from my mother. It was a massive block of text, filled with crying emojis and overly dramatic language. "Everett, honey, we are so devastated." The text read, "We had no idea Sterling was capable of such lies. Your father and I are heartbroken over the money we lost, and we miss you so much. Family shouldn't be divided like this. The dust has settled now. Let's all meet for dinner this Sunday and move forward as a family." I read the message twice. I sat on my bed, staring at the glowing screen. Not once in that massive paragraph did she say the word, sorry. Not once did she apologize for refusing to listen to me. Not once did she acknowledge the trauma of throwing her own son onto the lawn in the middle of the night. She only mentioned the money they lost. They didn't want accountability. They just wanted to sweep their horrific behavior under the rug and pretend they were a happy family again because their golden child had turned out to be a fraud. They wanted comfort. I wanted peace. I typed a single sentence in response. "You made your choice that night. Live with it." I hit send. Then I went to their contact profiles and I blocked my mother. I blocked my father. I blocked Aunt Diane, Fletcher, and anyone else who had eagerly participated in my destruction. I put my phone face down on the desk. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't a lonely quiet anymore. It was the quiet of a clean slate. I had survived the storm, and for the first time in my life, I was the one steering the ship. The weeks that followed that explosive Sunday morning were the quietest of my entire life. It was not the heavy, anxious, suffocating silence I had experienced while sleeping on Reed's lumpy couch. That old silence was filled with fear. This new silence was different. It was a clean, sweeping silence. It was the sound of a toxic foundation finally crumbling to the ground and settling into dust. I did not have to look over my shoulder anymore. I did not have to check my phone every 5 minutes, wondering if another relative was going to send me a hateful message based on Sterling's lies. The truth was out, and the truth is a remarkably effective shield. I did not have to go looking for information about what happened to Sterling. When a golden child falls from a very high pedestal, the shockwaves travel incredibly fast. Reed, who still had a few solid connections in our old hometown, called me one evening while I was sitting at my drafting table, sketching a new logo for a client. I put him on speakerphone, the warm glow of my desk lamp illuminating my workspace, and I listened. Hearing the details of Sterling's rapid decline felt like watching karma go to work with a heavy sledgehammer. Claire's lawyer was an absolute shark in the courtroom. Sterling had assumed he could manipulate the legal system the same way he manipulated our parents. But a judge does not care about your charming smile or your expensive cashmere sweaters. The judge cared about the paper trail. Because Sterling had deliberately drained their joint accounts to fund his secret affair with Bianca, and because he had actively tried to hide assets by selling his black Porsche for cash right before the divorce filings hit, the court showed him absolutely zero mercy. The financial discovery phase of the divorce was a bloodbath. Claire kept the sprawling suburban house. She kept both of the remaining cars. She even kept their golden retriever, a dog Sterling did not care about but fought over just to be petty. Sterling walked away from that marriage with nothing but a few suitcases of clothes and a mountain of legal fees he could no longer afford to pay. But the financial ruin of the divorce was only the first domino to fall. Sterling was a mid-level manager at a very conservative, high-end wealth management firm. He prided himself on his pristine corporate image. He always wore tailored suits, schmoozed with the right executives, and projected an aura of absolute perfection. But during financial discovery, Claire's lawyer found hotel and restaurant charges that appeared to have been billed to Sterling's employer as client expenses. The information was forwarded to the firm's compliance department, which opened an internal audit of his emails and expense reports. They found out he had been using his corporate expense account to buy expensive lunches and book downtown hotel rooms for Bianca, fraudulently claiming they were client meetings. In the corporate world, stealing company money to fund an affair is an immediate death sentence. They fired him on a Tuesday morning. He didn't even get a severance package. Reed heard from a guy who worked in the same building that Sterling was escorted out of the glass lobby by 2 armed security guards, carrying his personal belongings in a single cardboard box, while his former colleagues watched in stunned silence. His steady salary, the cornerstone of his massive ego, was gone in an instant. And Bianca, the woman he had blown up his entire family to protect? The woman he had chosen over his own brother? She vanished the exact second the money dried up. Reed told me she blocked Sterling's number the day after he lost his corporate job. She was never in it for love. She did not care about Sterling as a person. She wanted the passenger seat of the Porsche, the fancy weekend getaways, and the fine dining. The moment Sterling became a broke, unemployed liability with a ruined reputation, she dropped him without a single second thought. She packed her bags, walked out of the hotel room he had rented for her, and never looked back. With no wife, no mistress, no job, no salary, and no luxury car, Sterling had to face the harsh, freezing reality of the bed he had made. He had nowhere left to turn. Our parents, who had blindly handed over their retirement money and raided the family college fund to save him, finally cut him off. It was not out of some grand moral principle. It was not because they suddenly felt a deep, agonizing guilt about what they did to me. It was purely out of self-preservation. They realized he was a financial black hole. They had been completely scammed by their own son, and the embarrassment of it, the realization that their perfect boy was a con artist, made them lock their doors to him. Sterling was forced to move into a rundown, deeply depressing apartment complex on the very outskirts of the city. Reed drove past it once just to see if the rumors were true. He described it to me in vivid detail. It was the kind of place with flickering yellow porch lights, stained concrete walkways, weeds growing through the cracks in the parking lot, and cheap plastic blinds hanging crookedly in the windows. Sterling, the man who used to look down his nose at me for buying generic brand groceries, was now living in a place where the police were called twice a week for domestic disputes and noise complaints. He had no audience left to perform for. He had no one left to blame. He was entirely alone with the wreckage of his own arrogant choices. Knowing all of this did not make me jump for joy. I didn't throw a party. I didn't celebrate his misery. But it did bring me a profound, anchoring sense of closure. The universe had balanced the scales. The truth had acted like gravity, pulling everyone exactly where they deserved to be. Meanwhile, back in my world, the storm had passed, and the sun was finally coming out. Mr. Ashford, the CEO of the marketing firm, called me into his office one Friday afternoon. I walked in expecting a standard project review. Instead, he handed me a new contract. "Everett, you stepped up when we needed you," Mr. Ashford said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You handle pressure better than anyone on my team, and your creative instincts are flawless. I am bumping you up to senior art director. It comes with a massive increase in your salary, full stock options, and your own dedicated team." I shook his hand, walked out of that office, and felt like I could fly. That promotion changed everything. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. I started looking for a new place to live, eager to leave that cramped, depressing studio apartment behind me. But toxic families do not just let you go quietly into the night. When they lose control over you, they will eventually try to reel you back in using the only tactics they know: guilt, obligation, and financial manipulation. Without their golden child to focus on, and with the bitter, humiliating reality of their lost retirement savings staring them in the face, my parents suddenly remembered they had another son. The blocked texts and ignored phone calls eventually escalated to physical mail. 3 months after the explosive confrontation in their dining room, I walked down to the mailroom of my apartment building. Nestled between a utility bill and a grocery flyer was a thick, cream-colored envelope. I recognized my father's sharp, aggressive cursive handwriting immediately. My stomach did a brief, involuntary flip, a ghost of the old fear I used to carry. I carried the envelope back up to my studio. I made a strong cup of black coffee, sat down at my desk, and stared at it. I sliced it open with a penknife. Inside was a 2-page letter, written on my mother's expensive stationery. Everett, the letter began. Your mother and I have spent the last few months doing a lot of soul-searching. The house is very quiet these days. We recognize that mistakes were made during Sterling's divorce. Tensions were incredibly high, and we were misled by people we trusted. We want to put this ugly chapter behind us. We are getting older, Everett. Your uncle recently passed away, and attending his funeral made us realize how short life truly is. We need to start making concrete decisions about the estate, the remaining property, and your future inheritance. We simply cannot do that while this family remains fractured. Please call your mother. We are willing to forgive and forget. I read the letter twice. I sat back in my chair, looked at the ceiling, and actually let out a dry, hollow laugh that echoed in the small room. It was an absolute masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Mistakes were made. Notice how there was no "I made a mistake" or "we were wrong." The passive voice did all the heavy lifting to avoid taking any real, personal accountability. We were misled. They were still pushing the blame entirely onto Sterling, refusing to acknowledge their own vicious actions. They refused to admit that they were the ones who physically threw my belongings onto the lawn. They were the ones who looked at me with disgust. They were the ones who refused to let me speak a single word in my defense. And the absolute kicker, the most insulting part of the entire letter, was the dangling carrot of the inheritance. My father knew I had struggled financially in the past. He thought he could buy my forgiveness by hinting at a payday. He thought I was still that terrified, broke 28-year-old kid kneeling on the wet grass, begging for scraps of their approval. He thought he could wave a check in my face and erase the trauma they inflicted on me. He didn't know that my life had completely changed. He didn't know about my promotion. He didn't know that my new salary was more than enough to live incredibly comfortably. I didn't need a single dime of his conditional, toxic, blood-stained money. I would rather be broke for the rest of my life than accept a financial inheritance that required me to surrender my dignity. I took the thick, cream-colored pages, stacked them neatly, tore them perfectly in half, and dropped them straight into the trash can. I did not write an angry reply. I did not call to yell at them. I let the absolute silence be my final answer. They wanted a relationship with me now because their preferred option had turned out to be a total fraud. They wanted the comfort of pretending they were good, loving parents without doing the agonizing, ego-crushing work of actually apologizing and changing their behavior. But I was no longer a backup plan. I was a person, and I absolutely refused to be a placeholder in my own family. That night, I went out for dinner with Reed and a few new friends I had made at the firm. We sat on a wooden patio under bright string lights, eating incredible food, drinking cold beer, and laughing until our ribs physically hurt. I looked around the table at these people. These were people who knew me, who respected my boundaries, and who had never once asked me to shrink myself down to make them comfortable. I realized right then, looking at their smiling faces, that my life wasn't empty because I lost my biological family. My life was finally full because I had cleared out the poison, making room for something real, honest, and completely safe. 3 years have passed since the night my father pointed a trembling finger at the driveway and screamed at me to get out of his house. If you had told me back then, while I was sitting in my freezing car with my shattered laptop and my garbage bags full of wrinkled clothes, that being thrown away was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, I would have thought you were clinically insane. When you are in the middle of the storm, you cannot see the sunlight. You only feel the rain. But time has a very funny, undeniable way of revealing the absolute truth. I don't live in that cramped, noisy studio apartment anymore. Thanks to my promotion and the incredible salary that came with it, I saved up enough money to buy my own place. It is a beautiful, light-filled, mid-century modern house in a quiet neighborhood. It has a large, green backyard, a massive kitchen where I love to cook, and a heavy, solid oak front door that only opens for people I actively choose to let into my life. I bought a brand new car. I replaced the broken laptop with the absolute best, highest-end equipment on the market. I built a life that is entirely, undeniably mine. I built it brick by brick, funded by my own hard work, and protected by my own rigid boundaries. Reed is still my best friend. We are closer now than we ever were. A year ago, we actually started a small side business together, doing freelance branding and marketing for local coffee shops and breweries. It's thriving. He was the guy who opened his door and let me sleep on his smelly sofa when I had absolutely nothing. So he is the guy who gets to sit at the head of my dining table now that I have everything. We host massive barbecues in my backyard on the weekends. My house is always full of music, the smell of good food, loud laughter, and genuine, unfiltered connection. This is my chosen family. I haven't spoken a single word to my parents or Sterling in 3 years. Not a text, not an email, not a phone call. The silence is golden. Occasionally, news still trickles down through the grapevine. People talk, and sometimes Reed hears things from old acquaintances. I heard Sterling is still bouncing between low-paying entry-level jobs. He cannot hold down a position because he constantly clashes with management. He is still playing the victim. He blames his ex-wife, he blames his former boss, he blames the economy, and he probably still blames me for his miserable existence. Because he never took accountability for his actions, he never grew. He is trapped in a prison of his own making, forever bitter, forever looking for a shortcut. My parents are still living in that big, quiet, empty suburban house. They refuse to admit their own role in the destruction of their family. To this day, they tell the extended relatives that I am a rebellious, deeply ungrateful son who abandoned them in their old age. They paint themselves as the tragic victims of a broken generation. Let them say it. Their false narrative does not control me anymore. Their words have no power in my house. The hardest, most painful lesson I had to learn in my 20s was that sharing DNA with someone does not automatically make them your family. Blood gives you a biological connection, yes. It gives you shared physical traits. But blood does not guarantee loyalty. It does not guarantee respect. And it certainly does not guarantee love. For years, I twisted myself into knots trying to be the good son. I stayed quiet when they insulted me. I took the blame for things I didn't do. I accepted far less than I deserved because I genuinely thought that was what family required. I thought family meant enduring pain. I thought if I just loved them hard enough, if I was just useful enough, they would eventually see my value. I thought I could earn my way into their hearts. But toxic people do not value you for who you actually are. They value you for what you can do for them. Sterling valued me because I was a highly convenient scapegoat to hide his disgusting affair. He used me as a human shield. My parents valued me as a punching bag. They needed somewhere to direct their anger, so they didn't have to face the terrifying, heartbreaking reality that their golden child, the son they bragged about to their friends, was actually a manipulative monster. The exact moment I stopped playing the role they assigned me, the moment I presented them with the undeniable truth, they threw me away like a piece of garbage. And surviving the absolute worst, most complete betrayal from the very people who were supposed to protect me unconditionally, taught me how incredibly strong I actually am. I realized that my desperate fear of being abandoned was the very thing keeping me trapped in their cycle of abuse. Once they actually abandoned me, the worst thing had already happened. The monster in the closet came out and I survived it. The fear was completely gone. And underneath that fear was a relentless, unshakable, burning drive to succeed on my own terms. You do not have to endure emotional abuse just because the person hurting you shares your last name. You do not have to attend every single argument you are invited to. You do not have to accept a fake, poorly worded apology that lacks any sign of changed behavior. And you absolutely do not have to negotiate your own mental peace just to keep someone else comfortable in their web of lies. If you are listening to my voice right now, and you are sitting in a dark room, staring at your phone, wondering why the people who are supposed to love you keep treating you like you are disposable, I want you to hear me clearly. Look at the screen. Listen to my words. It is not your fault. There is nothing fundamentally wrong with you. You cannot fix a dynamic that requires you to be broken in order to function. You cannot heal a sickness that the patient refuses to acknowledge. Sometimes, the bravest, most powerful thing you can do in your entire life is pack your bags, walk out the front door, and never, ever look back. It will hurt. God, it will hurt. It will be terrifying. You will have nights where you stare at the ceiling and wonder if you made a massive mistake. You will grieve for the family you deserved but never actually had. But I promise you this, one day, the storm will run out of rain. You will wake up in a life that is completely, beautifully peaceful. You will look around at the home you built with your own two hands, the friends you intentionally chose, and the profound respect you demanded from the world, and you will realize that walking away was the exact moment your real life finally began. I want to know your thoughts on this dynamic. Have you ever had to walk away from a highly toxic relationship or cut off a family member to save yourself? What was the hardest part of setting that strict boundary, and how did it ultimately change the trajectory of your life? Please share your experiences in the comments section below. We are building a powerful community of survivors here on this channel, and your specific story might be the exact thing someone else desperately needs to hear today to finally find the courage to choose their own peace. If you don't feel comfortable sharing the private details of your story, but you found value in this lesson and resonate with what I've said, simply drop the word "good" in the comments so I know this message reached you. Thank you so much for being here, for taking the time to listen, and for continuing to support this channel. Remember, your peace is priceless. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. I'll see you in the next video.